Welcome to a poker vlog with a bit of a difference. Poker with kids.
I'm going to play all by myself. Me!
Yes.
Daddy! Peekaboo. Peekaboo.
Daddy! There you see?
Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!
Here's a poker vlog with a bit of a difference.
Me!
Poker with kids. And once again, we're back with vlog number 34, Poker with Kids. This time we're going to look at the recently completed Australian Poker Tour event from Brisbane. Played in a few events and some success. We'll get to that a little bit later. But just before we get to that, it's actually been a good start to the year for a few chess players turned poker players. You had Michael Adamo, who's based out of Melbourne. He took out the 100k main event at the Australian Poker Open held at the Star Gold Coast. And following week, we had Charles Sy from Brisbane, followed it up winning the APT main event, obviously at APT Brisbane. You might notice in the background, this is actually a location that we've been to before on the vlog. If you go back to vlog number 30, this area over here was actually where I filmed vlog 30, and in the background what now looks like a lake was once a sporting field. This really means that Daryl Summers clearly lied to me in the old campaign for Queensland tourism back in the 80s and 90s, the old beautiful one day, perfect the next. We've had rain everywhere for the last week. We've had bushfires that are still going on in some parts of the country. Yeah, crazy world of weather. We've got parks turning into lakes, but we'll push on with the vlog, shall we? So this is a view across the main playing area at Eaton's Hill from the upper deck, where you can obviously view the events below. Plus, I had a few tables there as well. Good to see APT. They're using all the large tables, so you generally get 10-handed play, although you get plenty of room if it is a 6-max type event. Now we're going to move to the trophies with the distinctive Australian Poker Tour style, the sort of, I guess it's an inverted diamond with the black background. Good to see that they've got sponsors on the trophies in addition to all the details about the event. So always nice if you can take down one of those and bring one of those home. Next area is the higher limit area where they had the dealer run events like the grind, the 8 game, etc. And they also had a small merchandise area. So bit for everybody there. You could get your t-shirts, a bit of poker equipment, some chips, all sorts of things. This is my 6-max receipt and my starting stack for the event. Over the course of the APT Brisbane, me being based on the Gold Coast and working as well, I actually ended up playing three poker games, mate, not technically 3 events. However, I was basically travelling up there after work or played one event on a weekend. The first one I played was the 6-max shootout. A couple of things about this one. First of all, the format. Personally, I really like the format. Shootouts are slightly different strategy-wise in terms of how to play it compared to a normal tournament. But the big thing to take away from it is that you're just playing the people at your table. It's not a case of sitting there where, okay, obviously you're playing against the people at your table, and after a few people get knocked out, all of a sudden there's more people come to your table, or you'll move tables and things like that. You've then got to play against new players that you may or may not have seen before, different chip stacks. All of a sudden you might have gone from being a big stack at one table to a short stack at another table. Things like there might be a slow period at your table where nobody really chips up and you fall behind the average stack and things like that. In a shootout, there's none of that. All you have to do is beat the players at your table. And in this time with the 6-max format, beat the 5 other players at your table, qualify through to the second round, and you're actually in the money as well. So good structure in terms of the payout. So just win your table, you know you're in the money, and then obviously as you progress through if you make the third round with the final table, potentially increase that min cash. But generally speaking, like the format. In terms of sizing up the table, I remember the old line for rounders that if you can't spot the sucker in the first half hour at the table, you are the sucker. It was pretty easy early on to spot the players who'd be the most problematic at the table, and fortunately for me, they didn't turn out to be the ones that were there at the end. Actually, one of the guy that ended up winning the first table that I was at. The big spot that I'll discuss in a little while was against probably the toughest player at the table, where I won a big pot and essentially ended up with about half the chips at the table when we were four-handed. There was a guy who was a bit of a maniac. He had some chips early, but then made some really strange plays and was fairly quickly eliminated. Another tough player who ended up involved in a few tough spots. He ended up coming third, and I actually ended up with an old guy who was just played fairly ABC. Was complaining that his son was playing in another tournament in another part of the Eaton Hill complex, and that he was drinking and stuff like that. So he really wasn't even focused that much on the games. He was basically, by the time he got the heads up, he'd almost pretty much conceded the table before we actually played it out. So as I said, we'll get to looking at a few spots later, but as I said, I ended up winning the first table. From a timing point of view, I guess it doesn't work out the greatest that you then have to wait till all the tables finish, but I suppose it's one of those things with the format. You actually don't have a lot of choice but wait until all the shootout tables are finished for round one before you can progress to round two. So altogether they had 106 entries. Obviously had their initial shootout tables. That gave you 18 table winners. Those table winners then got put on 3 six-max tables for round two. Then with those 3 tables, the top 2 from each table then progressed with the chips that they held through to the final table, and then obviously played out to a winner. Thought I'd run through a couple of critical hands from the six-max shootout. This one in particular was one that really got me going in the tournament. So we're playing 700, 1400 blinds with a 700 big blind ante. Player under the gun raises to 3,000. Next player, who's the cutoff, we're playing 5-handed at this stage, he calls 3,000. I look down at Ace Jack of Spades. And here obviously I've got 2 reasonable options. Calling, 3-betting is an option. I thought, given that we were, it's 20k start stack, I mean, I could 3-bet, but I'm not really willing to put it in necessarily in this situation pre-flop. So I thought, play the hand in position, see a flop, call the 3,000. The blinds folded, and we had ourselves a pretty sizable pot. We saw a flop of 8-5-4, 2 spades. And the under the gun player checked. The player in the cutoff let out for 6,500. Again, here I've got, obviously, I think calling or raising are both reasonable options. But again, given that I haven't actually made my hand yet, I don't really want to have to commit unless something changes. So I decided just to call. And the player who had raised pre-flop decided to move all in. The cutoff folded. And I think here, especially with the dead 6,500, the pot being so big, I actually thought I was covered. Turns out I wasn't. I decided to make the call. And it turns out that I'm actually in pretty good shape. His hand, red kings. So basically a coin flip. I mean, he's a very slight favourite, but obviously with the flush draw, the overcard, I'm in pretty good shape. Got a number of ways to win the hand. There's also the possibility of a run out with 6-7 to chop, which wouldn't be such a bad outcome. So essentially we're off to the races, and this is for over half the chips in play. So it really was a key pot. Turn card was a blank, but the river was a spade. And took it down to a flush. That gave me, as I said, over half the chips in play, and obviously a critical hand to go along and taking out the shootout for the first table. Next critical hand was when we were three-handed. This time I'm pretty sure it was blind against blind. I was in the big blind. The small blind decided to limp. I looked down at Queen 10 offsuit. I had a vast majority of the chips. I mean, I could try and play it aggressively, but I don't think my opponents are going to commit their chips unless they have a hand that's really beating or at least doing well against Queen 10. So just decided to check my option, and we saw a flop of Queen Jack 8. Rainbow, I don't think there are any flush draws or anything like that. So it checked to me. I put out a bet, and my opponent, who was getting short, decided to shove. I think here there's, obviously with the top pair as well as the gut shot, I'm obviously calling every day. And turned out that he had Queen 2 offsuit. So ahead with a 10 kicker, and ran out was clean. And we skipped that pot to go heads up. And the final hand of the first shootout table, this one really played itself. By this stage, like I said, going into heads up, I had a pretty sizable chip lead. By this stage, I think my opponent was down to under 5 big blinds. I'd say it was probably about 8-1, if not more, as far as the chip lead was concerned. Pretty straightforward. He shoves on the button. I look down at pocket threes, calling all day. He turns over, king for offsuit. We're off to the races. Threes need to hold for me to take out the first table. And the run out. To be honest, I don't even know what the exact run out was, but it was clean. Threes hold. And we're going through to round 2. And here we have all the chips from the first shootout table, and this is our start stack for the second shootout table. Ultimately, the winner was actually a player that we had on the second round table, and he didn't. I mean, he seemed like a reasonable player, but nothing particularly outstanding, and he required a lot of luck to survive in one hand. I remember he was fairly short. He put half his stack in pre-flop, then saw I believe it was like a queen and 2 low cards on a flop against another opponent who had him covered. He put him all in on bet enough to put him all in on the flop, and the guy's going, well, I've got half my stack in, I call. He's rolled over king 10 offsuit when the opponent had top pair with, I think it was Queen Jack on a Queen 7-4 or something like that, and the guy who ended up winning ended up with king 10 offsuit, and of course king rolls off on the turn. He survives and ultimately goes on to not only make the top 2 for the table, but then go on to win the final table. Having said that, in the second table, obviously a much tougher table. I really just didn't get any spots, nothing like what happened on the first table. The player to my right, he chipped up fairly early on, and it really handcuffed me because he was almost always coming in for a raise, so or 3-betting or calling a raise if there was a raise in front of him if he was playing a lot of hands, and betting a lot of flops. So it was one of those times where you really was somewhat handcuffed. You had to sort of wait for a hand before you could play it. Otherwise, you're really putting in chips with just hoping for a flop to come your way and hit something rather than relying on a good starting hand that is going to be playable on the flop regardless of what the flop is in most circumstances. Ultimately ended up fourth on my table, so just a min cash, but still a min cash. Good way to start off the series and get the APT Brisbane underway. This is the second shootout table and the prize winners with Mitchell with his winner's trophy. Now we move on to the 8-game satellite. This is the start stack for the 8-game satellite and the early tables that were seeded for the 8-game satellite. One innovation they had this time with the structure is they actually put an 8-game event on. However, I was actually talking to one of the APT guys during the event. They basically, to be able to justify having the dealers on for the event, they had to put it an 1,100 price point, which with young kids and things needed around the home, not too long ago I bought a fridge that was actually worth 1,100, so couldn't really justify putting that in as an entry for a poker tournament. However, they were running a satellite for the 8-game, which obviously was an 8-game format satellite. So that was effectively my main event. Obviously, that was my main focus. That's what I prefer to play, mixed games rather than just the usual no limit hold'em. Obviously, there's not the player pool, the money in it, but it's you gotta play poker to enjoy it. So played the 8-game satellite. They ended up with 18 runners, which gave them 2 seats to the main event, plus I think around $1,000, which is almost a third buy-in for third place. Ultimately, I finished midfield. I think I finished 9th out of the 17, but it's one of those ones that was an interesting start. I think I won 3 out of the first 4 hands. We started off with triple draw. I started with a 10k stack, and within the first level, I was already up to 14k around there. Thought this is going to be a cruisy day. Be able to get through the table. Obviously, things didn't turn out like that. I think I misplayed a few hands. Yes, it's 6 or 7 handed, but given that it's a mixed game format, I think the big bet games are played a lot tighter than you'd ordinarily find. So in one hand in particular, it was folded to me on the button. I decided to put in a small raise with ace-8 offsuit, and then got 3-bet by the small blind. Given that I really don't think the 3-betting is fairly tight 3-betting ranges for the most part in mixed games, so I really should have just mucked the ace-8. I decided to call, flopped a gut shot. I think it was something along the lines of 965 rainbow or something along those lines. So look, I'll take a card off where he check bet call, blank on the turn, and it went check check. Again, blank on the reward, check, he bet, and I just folded and he showed jacks anyway, which makes perfect sense. And another one where it's the kind of hand that I think even if I flopped an ace, it'd be difficult to play. Obviously, you could represent a better ace, ace king, ace queen, something like that. But yeah, that kind of thing really hurt my stack. And with a 10k stack, fairly short levels, you're playing 15-minute levels. And this time they had a button ante for the stud games, which in some ways sped up the game, but in other ways it really did become a big hit to the system. I know later on in the tournament, I remember we had gone from the limit games, going through the horse rotations, so limit hold'em, limit Omaha high-low, and I believe it was around, might have been 300, 600 blinds, 600, 1200 limits or something like that. Actually, no, it might have been bigger than that. It might have been around 4-8 blinds, 8-16 levels or something, limits or something like that. But we've got around to, obviously got through the Omaha high-low. I remember I chopped the Chopped the last pot, but it was a three-way hand, so I chipped up a little bit. Was fairly short after a few sort of, like I said, that few early decisions like the ace-8 against the pocket jacks. Dropped a few chips that I didn't really need to, and in these tournaments, really all chips are very, very valuable, especially with the blinds going up so quickly. And then basically being handcuffed to somewhere between 1 and 6 big bets. So it's a case of if you're going to play a hand, you pretty much have to come in for a raise. You know you're going to bet the flop or 4th street. So you're almost committing to a hand just by playing it pre-flop. So it just meant that I was pretty much folding almost anything. Came around to the Raz rotation, I was the button ante for the first hand. All of a sudden it's 1800 ante. Effectively 300 from all the 6 players at the table, but just paying it one hit 1800, that was the profit that I made off that round of Hold'em and Omaha just disappeared in one hit, and eventually I got it in okay shape in Raz. Got it in with I'd effectively committed almost stack on 3rd street with 10 as my door card and 5 deuce in the window, 5 deuce my hole cards. The 2 other players in hand had a queen and an 8 as the up card, so yes, I'm behind with the 10, behind the 8, but if I am, I'm not far behind. And ultimately I just probably ended up pairing the 10, pairing the 2, picked up a king, and I think I made a king jack 10 low, which obviously wasn't going to be good enough to win the pot, and I was eliminated in 9th. I had Rob Campbell as a bit of a feature attraction playing in the actual 8-game event, and he actually went on to win it. I think they had 17 players in the actual event itself. So both of them small events, a bit sort of niche market kind of thing, but good to see that APT are venturing outside just the no limit hold'em and its infinite variations type events. Good to see. I think the schedule for Sydney's just been released, and I noticed they've got a horse event on there. I think they've priced it in the 4-figure range. I think it was $1,100 or $1,200. So hopefully I might be able to get up there for that. And if they do, hopefully again they run a satellite, because again, $1,200 with young kids, it's a bit of a hit to the system. So might try and see if we can play in the event, but get in through a satellite and treat that as my main event. But albeit that I didn't actually get through to the main 8-game event, fantastic to play a mixed game. A lot of familiar faces, especially from Crown and in particular. So yeah, good to see some familiar faces. Good to see a mixed game tournament. And yeah, even though it did only get 17 runners, still good that they've got that type of thing they're putting on as an event. And yeah, thank you APT, and hopefully we can do better next time. The other event that I played in the APT was actually a satellite for the main event. Again, with the 8-game satellite, I thought that was effectively my main event. Otherwise I might have paid for the main event directly as a direct buy-in, but I thought if I'm going to play the 8-game, that'll be my main event. I thought I'd have a crack at a satellite. Again, it was just another table where I couldn't really get much going. Had a few people that chipped up early, a few somewhat questionable plays, but you get that in tournaments all the time. And yeah, I basically just ended up getting short. Really didn't get anything going. Didn't get any hands, any spots to really play, and ended up going out midfield. So missed out on one of the I think it was 10 seats they had on offer for the satellite. But yeah, good to see that APT are not only putting on the events at a much lower price point than you'll typically get at your casino events, but also that they're willing to run satellites and things like that. So good to see. Generally a well organised event. Bit of an unusual location. The previous photos that I'd seen of the grand ballroom where the main playing area was, put it like it was on the ground level of the first floor, and there was a sort of an upper seating area or something like that, but it was actually effectively a basement level, with the ground level being the sort of the upper viewing platform kind of thing, with where they had a few extra tables as well. They also had a separate area where they had most of the dealer run events. I think they had the grind, they had the 8-game satellite, obviously the 8-game itself over there, attached to the hotel part, but it was again a really weird setup where you came in on the lower ground floor, you could only catch a lift up to the ground floor, and then you got out on the ground floor, but again you had to get out, you had to go down to then go up, and it's a weird setup, but perfectly fine venue as far as poker is concerned. Thanks again to the Australian Poker Tour and all its people for putting on the event, and again congratulations in particular to Charles Hyde taking out the main event, and all the other winners and players of the series and all that kind of stuff. Good to see APT innovating. They've got 6 events across the series this year. As I mentioned earlier, the next one's up in Sydney at the start of April. Not sure if I'll be able to get up to it, but yeah, if I do, I'm definitely penciling in hopefully a horse satellite, and if possible, again they've brought back some of the games are a bit more in my wheelhouse. There's a short deck and that type of thing. So if I get up there, there'll be a few events for me to play, and hopefully we can do well if we do that. But I think that's going to wrap up vlog number 34. Once again, thanks for watching. Feel free to put a like, share, comment, all that sort of stuff. Get back to you if there's any feedback and comments like that. So be good to hear from some of the viewers about what they thought about the event, what they thought of some of those hands from the Six-Pack Shootout, and maybe some thoughts on the Australian Poker Tour and the poker scene generally in Australia. Would be interesting to hear from people. Anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.